Now we are currently in a preaching series called Lessons from Lockdown, where various different speakers have been sharing on the lessons that they feel God has been teaching them through this season. And today we're going to look at a passage in the New Testament that I've been drawn to again and again during lockdown. Now, I know that Joe mentioned lament a few weeks ago, and that's something that I think we've all needed to do in one form or another, because it's been such a confusing time, hasn't it? To be able to express honestly before God that confusion, all of our different struggles, our pain and our grief, as well as using that to be a bridge to grasp hold of the faith, to clamber up to our rock of security and to the truth and the hope that we know that we do find in him. If I'm really honest, the church hasn't been that great all the time at giving space for such honest and sometimes negative outbursts. But the Bible does. There is a lot of space given over to lament. In the Old Testament, there are books like Habakkuk, which I know Joe looked at a couple of weeks ago, but also Job and the Psalms. There are a lot of lament psalms, and they give helpful voice to such heartfelt cries of emotion. And can I just urge you, if that is where you feel you're at today, if you feel that you need an outlet, a way to express those deep emotions and you're not quite sure how to, spend some time in those books in the coming week. I think you would find that really helpful. But actually today I want to look at a story that caused a community and one family in particular huge heartache and grief. But I wanted to look at how Jesus beautifully interacts with each one of them where they're at. And as we read the passage together, I want to invite you to pray that God will make you aware of which character you feel most connected to and why. Please don't just read the story alongside me. Let it read you. I'm purposely not going to put the verses up because I'd actually like you just to sit and listen. It's quite a long passage. I've taken a few verses out here and there to try and shorten it a little bit, but it is quite a long passage. So you might want to just close your eyes so that you can reflect without distraction. We're going to be looking at the story of the raising of Lazarus. So perhaps you will connect with one of his sisters, Mary or Martha. Or maybe you'll feel that you connect with one of the community that's grieving alongside them. Or maybe you'll feel connected to one of Jesus's disciples as they're traveling with him. Or perhaps even Lazarus himself. Please just be open to being surprised as we read what might be a very familiar story to you. So I'm going to read from John 11. Now a man named Lazarus was ill. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay ill, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one that you love is ill." When he heard this, Jesus said, "This illness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she replied. "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world." After she said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here," she said, "and is asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who'd been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who'd come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there's a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he'd said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. And Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." If you had your eyes closed, you can open them again now, because that's the end of the passage. I'm just going to grab a drink. Now, it's the words in that shortest verse in the Bible, verse 35, Jesus wept, that I have come back to time and time again this year. Firstly, during my own personal grief story, having lost my mum earlier this year, but also in recent weeks, because they continue to reveal to me how much compassion that Jesus has for our human experience. Because he already knew that he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead, and yet he was still deeply moved by the grief of his friends, and he wept alongside them. Today, know that God grieves alongside us as we deal with the devastation of this pandemic. Now, the family in this story were very well known to Jesus, and he used to spend time in their home when he visited Bethany. They must have felt that deep friendship too, and have been really confident in it, because as soon as Lazarus fell ill, they sent word to Jesus, "Come back, your friend is sick, come back and heal him." And yet we read, because of that illness, Jesus decided to stay where he was for a few more days. Why? Because he knew that the greater miracle would be to raise Lazarus from the dead. Now, the disciples who were with him didn't understand. That seemed to be a regular occurrence with them, which is actually quite comforting for us. They were right with Jesus, and still there were many things that perplexed them. But all of the time, Jesus remained confident and assured in what he was doing. He wasn't ignorant of what happened or of what Lazarus' sisters must have been going through. But what about those sisters? Surely they must have been utterly devastated by Jesus' delay. They must have questioned whether he loved them as much as they thought he did, because he seemingly just ignored their request. They would probably have felt confusion, hurt, anger even. Have you ever felt like that when circumstances have bewildered you? In the times when you feel you need him most, are there some times that you actually feel that he's completely absent? What about this pandemic? Have you questioned what God is up to and whether he actually loves humanity at all? Have you begun to wonder whether he's actually as powerful as he's supposed to be? Let's remember that Jesus is the same today as he was then, full of assurance and fully in control of the situation. Now, we might be perplexed and confused, and that is a natural human response, but he is not. He's not surprised by anything. And while I don't believe that he sent this virus as judgment, I do believe he is working through it. towards a purpose that we simply might not be aware of or we may not understand. But like the Old Testament lament writers, and as we'll see with Martha in a moment, we too need to take our journeys towards recognizing that we don't have to understand everything that God does in order to be able to trust him. But that's a really hard lesson to learn in the midst of the pains of life, that one day we will understand. But right now, we simply need to wait and trust. Now, by the time Jesus arrived in Bethany, Lazarus had already been dead for 4 days, so there was quite a crowd, as was the custom of in those days for people to gather and mourn alongside the family. There were even professional mourners in sackcloth and ashes who would wail. So Bethany was not far from Jerusalem, we heard, less than 2 miles, so there could have been quite a crowd gathered. And you might have actually felt connection with them as I read through, especially because this time is a time of global loss, of global mourning, of global confusion. But when the sisters heard that Jesus had finally come, obviously too late to do anything about their request, or so they thought, there were 2 different responses from them. Martha ran out immediately. Mary did not. One confronted him, the other stayed hidden, showing her grief and disdain for Jesus's actions in a more subtle, but still quite a loud way. Martha went out and she got straight to the point. If you had been here, Jesus, our brother would not have died. And Jesus's response was to reassure her that her brother would rise again. He did answer her directly, but also a little bit cryptically too, because she actually misunderstood him to begin with. She thought he was referring to the end of time, but actually Jesus was in fact revealing who he is. And after he did so, he asked her a direct question. He said, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? He knew that Martha needed a theological head as well as heart response to what was going on. She needed to fully comprehend that he is the answer to all of life's questions. But notice that he asked her to exercise huge faith before he did anything about Lazarus. And isn't that what he asks us to do today too? Perhaps you've got lots of dreams and expectations that seem to have died over the years, maybe more so during lockdown. Maybe you have even lost someone in recent times, as I have, though that was not due to the virus. Can you, like Martha, say with confidence, yes, Lord, she replied, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. Now, as Joe mentioned a few weeks ago, the answer to so many of our why questions is not a what, not an explanation, but a who. Like God did when he was speaking to those who voiced their questions honestly to him in the Old Testament, Jesus here declared who he is. And then he invited Martha to believe it. And he invites us to do that too. Now, there is a book that I've been finding incredibly helpful in my own grief journey called Good Grief. And in that, I had written most of my preaching. I'd read a lot of the book before I got to the point where he actually discusses John 11 a lot. And in that, he points out that interestingly, the does not appear in the Greek text where Jesus spoke. So actually what he's saying is, I am resurrection and life. He is declaring that the power of life, the power of resurrection is found in him. Now, after Martha's declaration of faith, she went to fetch Mary from their home. And as we saw, their responses were different when Jesus first came. But when Martha went to get Mary and said, look, the teacher is here, he's asking for you, Mary immediately got up, and went to him. That shows me that sometimes we need those around us who really know us well to encourage us to connect with Jesus again. Because Mary had surrounded herself with a lot of people, she was gaining comfort from them, but Jesus knew that what she actually needed was comfort directly from him. She too expressed the deep pain within her when she came and fell at his feet, and she said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Both sisters said exactly the same thing. So we might wonder, why did Jesus allow them to feel grief? Why didn't he just say, don't worry, I've got an incredible miracle I'm about to do. Just hold on, please hang in there. No, instead, he allowed them to feel and express deep disappointment. He heard them. And the fact that their heartfelt cries of deep emotion are noted in this story shows me that actually we too have permission to both acknowledge and express our disappointments and our grief, because grief doesn't just appear in the Old Testament, it is right here in the midst of the Gospels too. But Jesus's response was different to Mary. We aren't actually told if he said anything to her at all. And sometimes that can feel the same for us. We don't feel like we get a response. But what we do know from this passage is that he saw her and those with her, and he was deeply moved. The passage says troubled even, and his response was to weep. He was emotionally impacted too. Just as Isaiah prophesied back in the Old Testament before Jesus came to earth, that he was going to be a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, as Isaiah 53:3. That is part of what the incarnation was about. God becoming human meant that he felt emotions, he felt sorrow. He was moved and distressed by the fact that the timing of what would show God's glory to so many of them meant that his close friends were going to experience pain and have their hope extinguished, at least for a time. Jesus shared in the suffering. Mary needed to know that he cared deeply and he understood her grief. And today we too need to know that we are not alone in our grief. He is with us and he has promised to remain with us. As they approached the tomb, Jesus was again deeply moved. He experienced the crowd weeping, mourning, accusing even. He doesn't sit far removed from the messiness, the pain and the anguish that we experience on this earth. He feels it with us. Even though he knows the end of the story and he knows how he's going to accomplish it, he is still prepared to journey alongside us, and he gets involved. He wants to be that friend that we can come and cry on, who will actually sit and cry with us. Although Mary and Martha experienced Jesus being away from them when they lost their brother, Jesus is with us always. And Lazarus' story actually speaks to me of the hope that we have in what will be, in the fulfillment of what Jesus will accomplish when human history is wrapped up and he creates the new heaven and the new earth that is referred to in Revelation 21:4, where it says, he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. Death no longer has the last word, although it might seem like it right now. We are often confused about death, partly because we are not made for it. It is the enemy. Yet, because of Jesus' death and resurrection, death has lost its sting, as it says in 1 Corinthians 15. So although we pass through death, we do not stay there. Now, Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead showed he has power over death, power to bring life. Lazarus' resurrection was temporary because he obviously died at some point later on, but it pointed to a much greater revelation, the eternal truth that those who believe in Jesus' death and resurrection have eternal life, as John 3:16 states. For God so loved the world that he sent his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but will have eternal life. So Lazarus' resurrection has at its root the hope that's available for all of us today. We live in those in-between times since Jesus' death and resurrection, but before that final moment in Revelation. And while Lazarus' sisters had to wait 4 days to see him resurrected, we might have to wait a lot longer. And that waiting can be really tough. But one day that waiting will be over forever. Now, when Lazarus came out of the tomb, Jesus said, take off the grave clothes and let him go. And perhaps that's what he's saying to you today. Take off those grave clothes. Take off those things that you're clinging to, that you're trying to get security from. because I want to set you free from those. And interestingly, he asked those nearby to Lazarus to take the grave clothes off, to do the unbinding. Maybe he's nudging you today to help somebody else. Now, this unusual, confusing and somewhat fearful time has been a time of shaking. So many of our usual routines, the things that we put our security in, have just gone. What's left? What is left in your life? Can I suggest that Jesus is still there? He is the one who never lets us down, even if we don't understand him at times. He is the firm foundation that we can build our lives on, and he's also the one who knows us inside out. He knows what we need, and he interacts with us in a really personal way. He created us, therefore he knows our idiosyncrasies. He knows if you are like Martha. If you need that intellectual, theological wrestling with him right now, you need to assert your faith declarations in order to be able to cling on to him. Or maybe you simply need to give yourself permission to weep, as Mary did, both with others who are mourning, but also with Jesus himself, knowing that he sits and weeps alongside you. I've heard a lot recently about the rise in Netflix and other TV subscription watching and binge eating and more drinking during lockdown. Many of us have felt the need to numb the feelings of loneliness, of pain, and of sorrow. But perhaps Jesus is gently offering you the chance to sit with him and just to allow those emotions to surface and express them. And he's saying he's there to comfort you. He's inviting you to place all of your heartbreak in his hands, and you can trust him with it. Perhaps you are one that needs to put your faith in the fact that Jesus is the resurrection and the life for the very first time. So today, can I just urge you to take some time to interact with the one who is resurrection and life, the one who is above and beyond time itself. He longs to commune with you more deeply and to transform you even more through this global time of uncertainty. But the choice is yours. Now, I wanted to play a video of a song by Wren Collective now, because I really feel that a lot of the words echo what I've been bringing out of this passage. But we discovered last night that due to copyright issues with YouTube, that's not a great idea. So can I just urge you, if you feel that something has stirred within you, actually just to take some time. It's called Weep With Me by Wren Collective. Find it and play it after the service and just spend some time with it, allowing it to seal in your heart what you feel God has been saying to you personally. I'm just going to read a few of the words now. Weep with me. Lord, will you weep with me? I don't need answers. All I need to know is that you care for me. Hear my plea. Are you even listening? Lord, I will wrestle with your heart, but I won't let go. You know I believe. Help my unbelief. Yet I will praise you. Yet I will sing of your name. Here in the shadows, here I will offer my praise. What's true in the light is still true in the dark. You're good and you're kind and you care for this heart. Lord, I believe. You weep with me. Now, I want to pray for us all, and actually you might want to make this prayer your own, either just by echoing in your heart, or I'll speak quite slowly in case you actually want to say the words out loud. Let's pray. Lord, I believe that you are resurrection and life. You are also here with me right now. I offer up my broken, confused heart to you. I feel fragile and tender. I don't understand, and that hurts, but I know that I can trust you even when it doesn't feel like it. I place my life in your hands. Deal with me gently, but help me to love you more and sense you closer, even if I understand less. I choose to declare again that what's true in the light is still true in the dark. Death does not have the last word. You do. You are good. You care. And I do believe you weep with me, with us all, in this time of collective pain and loss, and always. Thank you for the hope that you offer. Help me to drink deeply of it and to allow you to transform me. Amen. Now, if you've been affected at all by anything of what I've been saying, perhaps emotions have been stirred in you, or maybe you've started wrestling intellectually, there are people who would love to connect with you, to pray and to talk with you. And if you've responded to Jesus for the first time, or you would like to respond, please, again, do get in touch via the ways that will pop up on the screen after my face has gone away, because we would love to support you as you move forward in your journey with Jesus. And if you actually have any questions about what having faith in Jesus might mean, we're actually going to be beginning a 3-week online course on May the 18th called Hope Explored. I think the information on that will come up on screen too. So please just get in touch with the church office if you'd like to find out more about that. So it just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining us this morning. And may you know God's comfort, his peace, and his everlasting hope in this week ahead. Thanks.